Okay, so good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome and thank you for participating in this month's new partner webinar in partnership with the Public Health Institute. Easier, faster, cleaner, and expensive perspectives of Guatemalan stakeholders on LPG for cooking. My name is Kavanaugh Livingston, and I'm a Senior Associate for Partnerships at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. This webinar is part of a series that provides an introduction to the Alliance for new and current partners and an overview of our work. The benefits of partnership highlights upcoming opportunities and features on specific tools, resources, or engagement activities. After a short introduction on the Alliance, I will then hand over the presentation to my colleague, Julie Ipe, who will kick everything off. We will begin with a quick overview of the Alliance's mission. For those who are new to the Alliance, our objective is to create a thriving global market of clean cook stoves and fuels. This initiative was created in response to the persistent problem of household air pollution, which impacts 3 billion people who rely on solid fuels to cook their daily meals. This issue results in numerous impacts on human health, the environment and climate, local economies and livelihoods, and women and girls. The Alliance was launched in 2010 by a number of founding partners with a mission to address this multifaceted challenge. The Alliance's adoption goal of 100 million households by 2020 is now at the midpoint, and we are ahead of our projections, reaching 53 million households with clean and/or efficient cook stoves and fuels. We are going to switch things up from our usual introductory programming to provide participants with an overview of the 2016 partner survey results. As many of you already know, the Alliance sends these surveys annually to our partners. Last year's survey had 4 goals: understand needs and expectations of partners as we move into phase 3, align Alliance programming with partner goals and objectives, collect partner information and feedback on Alliance impact, and to inform our Clean Cooking Forum planning, and allow for recalibration of activities or procedures as necessary. As many last year served, and at the time of the partner survey, please note that this partner survey is separate from our phase 3 questionnaire, which I will go to in more detail. The partner survey allows the Alliance to learn a little more about who our partners are. As you can see, 36% of respondents have been Alliance partners for the past 1 to 3 years, and 22% have been partners for the past 3 to 5 years. 42% of respondents have been in the sector for 5 years or more, indicating an experienced partner base. The Alliance was pleased to see that partners rated our performance on our various value propositions, mostly at the satisfactory or highly satisfactory levels. The Alliance will continue to find ways to serve our diverse and unique partnership of more than 1,700 organizations and counting. We look forward to working with you on this endeavor, and if you have further thoughts and feedback, please feel free to share them with us at info@cleancookstoves.org. On another note, the Alliance is currently preparing to transition to phase 3 of its 10-year market enabling strategy, which will start in 2018 and end in 2020. The Alliance has defined phase 3 as the appropriate time to focus on supporting the sustainability of the clean cooking sector. To this end, the Alliance values input from our partners to help enhance our phase 3 planning efforts. Partner feedback is a vital aspect of the Alliance's efforts to define the phase 3 vision for sector sustainability. If you are interested in contributing your voice to these efforts, please provide your feedback to phase3@cleancookstoves.org. You will see on your screen the questions the Alliance is interested in learning about. You can learn more at cleancookstoves.org/partners/. The Alliance has so far received great feedback from our partners regarding phase 3. We would like to share some of the initial emerging themes that we have heard so far. Many partners encourage the Alliance to continue supporting behavior change communications, sector advocacy, brokering partnerships, and connecting the sector with the private sector. partners also provided similar feedback in the partner survey that was released last year. For those of you who are not an Alliance partner, we'd like to take this time to provide you more information on the benefits of becoming one. Becoming a partner is the best way to stay informed of Alliance activities globally and in country and gain benefits such as access to resources, capacity development, and networking opportunities. If you have any further questions on partnership benefits, please contact the Alliance. We'd like to take this time now to discuss some helpful Alliance resources. We hope you have already received the Save the Date for our biannual Clean Cooking Forum, which will be held in Delhi, India from October 24th through the 28th. You can learn more at www.cleancooking2017.org. The best way to receive timely notifications on updates regarding the forum is to sign up for a newsletter, which you can do so on our website at www.cleancookstoves.org. We hope to see you all there. Finally, some of you may have noticed that we have switched from the Global Meet/SoundPath webinar platform to GoToWebinar. Please feel free to send us feedback on your experience with the platform to info@cleancookstoves.org. Thank you so much for your time. Julie, please take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Kavanaugh. So as Kavanaugh mentioned, this is Julie Ipe, and I manage the Behavior Change Communication, or BCC, efforts here at the Alliance. And I'll just provide a really brief bit of background about the Alliance's BCC program as context for the presentation that you'll hear today. So the Alliance's Behavior Change Communication
Julie or Madeline, feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello? Hello? Kavanaugh? Hello?
I can hear you well, Julie.
Oh, okay.
All right, please stand by. There seems to be some issue with the muting the panelists. All right.
Can you hear me now, Kavanaugh? All right. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll just go ahead then. So just, again, a really brief overview on the Alliance's BCC program. So our efforts primarily consist of direct support for interventions in our focus countries. So throughout 2015 and 2016, we supported small-scale BCC interventions in 4 of our focus countries. Those were Bangladesh, Ghana, Guatemala, and Uganda. And last summer, we issued grants to organizations in Kenya, Nigeria, and Bangladesh to implement campaigns at a much larger scale. So hoping to reach millions of people with those. And those are now in the process of launching. So look out for more information on those in our newsletter and on our website. But just to provide a sense of what those will look like, we'll be using various channels to communicate about clean cooking, including radio ads, door-to-door outreach, and community theater. And the goal, of course, here is to build awareness about the benefits of clean cooking options broadly and where and how to buy them in hopes of motivating more people to purchase and use them correctly and consistently. So exciting stuff, and sharing the learnings from this work is also a big priority. So we'll be evaluating those campaigns and sharing the results. And another big priority for us in our BCC program is just providing a platform for sharing all of the work that our many partners are doing in this space. So, you know, how are they motivating the uptake of clean and efficient stoves, and how are they working to learn more about consumers and what motivates them? So we hope that others can learn from this work and perhaps be inspired as well. So we've launched this series of webinars on BCC, and today I'm excited to hear from Michelle Bashan from PHI, who also serves as a member of our reference group on BCC and so helps advise us on our work, and her colleague Marise Labriette from Aneris Consultants, who will share some really interesting research that they've done in Guatemala on some key opportunities for increasing the uptake of LPG there. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass things over to Michelle and Marise.
So they might have, sorry for that, they might have a problem with the connection because Michelle should be talking right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is this any better?
Perfect.
Hello.
Yes, Michelle, we can hear you.
Can you hear me, Marise?
Yes.
I'm not sure they can hear me though.
I think so.
Okay.
Everybody, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. Marise, can you, I can't see where the slide advance button is. Could you advance it for me, please?
So I need to have the control of that I don't have right now. So maybe, Kavanagh, if you can give me the control? Okay.
Oh, there. Wait, I saw it first.
Okay.
Okay, now I got it.
Okay, do it, please.
It went away. Kavanagh, can you try that again? I see an arrow. Okay, there it is. Okay. Maybe it'll, okay, there we go. I'll just keep my cursor right there. Thanks again for inviting us to talk to everyone about translating LPG market research into action. This morning we're going to talk about the market research we did in Guatemala, and Marise is also going to talk about a little, she'll give an abbreviated presentation about employer-based work we did to try to overcome some of the barriers of cost for initial LPG setup. And then this is all going to fold into a description of what industry engagement and what happened when we pulled in industry together to share these results with them. So it'll be really interesting for you, I hope. Just a word about who the Public Health Institute is. PHI has been around for 50 years. It's the largest nonprofit public health institute in the country, and we have a diversity of programs under our umbrella that range from statewide programs like the California Cancer Registry to global programs like the USAID Global Health Fellowship Programs, which trains fellows to be health officers around the world. More recently, we're in our second year of the antibiotic resistance program in India, where we're implementing research in the field. So fantastic, very interesting range of initiatives. And of course, clean household energy. The program, our work in Guatemala started probably 7 years ago with working with John McCracken at University del Valle de Guatemala on the burden of disease study, looking to focus burden of disease instead of a global analysis, but an analysis for Guatemala itself, and finding ways to find the provinces with the highest risk of disease. That was fascinating, and it was before we went completely to a focus on LPG. And with that shift, we began work in Guatemala focusing on LPG through both this market study that you'll hear about and through work Gente Gas is doing about a new entrepreneurial model for selling LPG. This work that you'll hear about today was really inspired by the LPG market study that the Global Alliance had done a couple of years earlier, and that study looks at a range of cooking options, not just LPG, but traditional stoves and improved cook stoves, and that really inspired us to dig deeper just in the area of LPG. And this is really our motivating our motivating piece is not to have this study be just something gathering dust on the shelf, and because if we want to grow the LPG market, there has to be an intelligent, deliberate strategy for growth. In Guatemala, LPG growth has been increasing only 3 to 4% a year, essentially a stagnant demand. And even more disappointing, demand for firewood has grown, while demand for firewood has outpaced demand for LPG. And so we thought, first we wanted to find out about the consumers, the market, the demand, all these issues for LPG. And then after we conducted the study, said, who cares about this most is industry. And we wanted to share our findings with industry and let them know that we have the same objective as they do in terms of growing the market for LPG. And we wanted to share what we found so that they could have a more comprehensive, logical outreach to consumers and grow the market. Amazingly, the market is still very large in Guatemala, with 500,000 urban households still using wood and not LPG, and only 19% of rural users using LPG. There is great potential in this market. So what's holding potential consumers back? Marisa is going to tell us more, but I can tell you that factors such as fear of LPG, a low opinion of retailers, and distrust of industry all put the brakes on use. And you'll hear more about that in just a sec. Okay, I can't see the advance. There it is. Okay. How we wanted to apply the market research finding was, as I mentioned, to help business refine their marketing strategy if they had one other than a passive strategy, and identify different areas of the market and identify who was their most likely user and how to reach them. In the segmentation study done by the Alliance, they found that there were a large proportion of easy-to-reach households for LPG. And among them are young working women who have some disposable income, who are using LPG and firewood, but continue to use LPG in a very limited fashion. There's enormous opportunity for growing the market among these continuing users, not even to mention new users. The other thing that we found, understanding what customers like and dislike, was huge safety concerns about the product. Women are unfamiliar how to cook with LPG. They've heard bad things about it, and the industry has their contacts with retailers have not been encouraging. I'm talking about underfilled cylinders, leaky, poor quality of cylinders, and no training on the part of the people that they interface with for replacement or setup of cylinders. And also apply these findings to improving the services and the product. And even in our meeting with industry, improving the services became one of the focuses of industry interest. So there is an awareness that this is an area that needs help. So I'm going to turn this over to my partner, Maurice Labrier, who is with the University Polytechnic of Madrid. And she's going to talk more in depth about what we found in our research with LPG users, and give you a little appetizer about our work on employer-based programs, where we look to have employers ease the transition into clean cooking. Maurice?
Thank you, Michelle. So yes, let's now review the main findings of our market research in Guatemala. So the first question is, what do consumers say about LPG? And to answer this question, our market research was carried out in a coordinated manner with the segmentation study, which was made by the Global Alliance in Guatemala, more or less at the same time as our market study. And both shared a common goal, which is that Guatemalan households use only clean fuels for cooking in the future and as soon as possible. Our focus was to identify the motivators for adoption, but also, this is very important, for growing the use of LPG beyond the initial adoption. And so for this purpose, one key principle of our market research was to understand the behaviors of LPG consumers based on their own experience, and really wanted to set aside our preconceived ideas such as, okay, those households are poor, so they are cooking with firewood. So we really wanted to go beyond these types of preconceived ideas. So we have worked with a sample of more than 60 women, all in urban and peri-urban areas. Why these areas? Because this is where LPG is more easily available. And so all those women were consumers, were LPG consumers, and more than half of them were also using firewood, so were fuel stickers. So as said by Michelle earlier, so the idea is to make the LPG pie bigger, knowing that in Guatemala, fuel sticking is very important. So the key motivators which prompt the decision to cook with LPG are, according to our study and to what is usually said anyway, so are the ease, speed, convenience, absence of smoke, and cleanliness of LPG compared to firewood. And those factors, very important, those factors were all spontaneously announced by all women in all focus groups, no exception. So there is really a strong agreement on that. As regards health and environmental benefits, they were well acknowledged by consumers, but even if this is not what we would like to hear, the reality is that those factors are not sufficient alone to prompt the decision to use LPG. And same conclusion applies to higher education and work outside the house. Of course, those factors help a lot for LPG adoption and consumption, but they are not precondition to LPG use. And this is I would say, a quite good news for the market. So meaning that the pie is really big. And here I want to share an interesting insight on smaller cylinders. So for households already consuming LPG, of course, the small cylinders are not sufficient for their needs, but small cylinders are appealing as an emergency reserve, meaning can be useful when gas is missing in the middle of a meal preparation, for example. And why this is interesting? Because right now, very few households keep a second LPG cylinder. And in fact, firewood is usually the emergency energy source, what contributes to fuel stacking. So here, I would say we have a few strong selling points, which could be the basis of a good marketing strategy to promote LPG for cooking. And we will see later what industry could do with that. So having said that, what are the barriers which impede consumers to cook exclusively with LPG? So consumers identified 3 types of very strong barriers. First, safety concerns on how to safely handle gas, and lack of familiarity with cooking practices with LPG, especially with the pressure cooker. And the pressure cooker is really important. It's essential for cooking food that takes a long time, for example, beans, and those, so this food that empty the cylinder too quickly, according to women. And in fact, the pressure cooker is their cooking device, which makes the difference between households cooking exclusively with LPG from fuel stackers. So really important. Second barrier, also very important, smaller and frequent payments, as this is the case with firewood, as far easier to manage by households with unstable income. And LPG price volatility, which is very high in Guatemala. So LPG price volatility adds to the cost uncertainties. And it appeared from our discussion with consumers that unstable income and unstable price were stronger barriers than the absolute income and price of gas themselves. And in fact, the total monthly payment for firewood suggests that households do have the capacity to pay for LPG if they could purchase LPG in smaller amounts. Finally, the fact that there is no way to measure how much LPG is used to cook a meal, it's very difficult for women, for consumers to compare the cost of cooking with LPG and the cost of cooking with firewood. And this contributes to the persistent belief that cooking with LPG is more expensive than with firewood. And in fact, comparative experiments which were made by households prove that this is not true, this is not the case. And so finally, the poor quality of cylinders in Guatemala contributes to safety concerns, but also to the poor impression consumers have of the LPG industry. And this is accentuated by the issue of partially filled cylinders and poor quality of the service given by retailers to the consumers. So at the end, consumers feel that they are taken advantage of, and they feel powerless to change the situation. And this mistrust also contributes to explain why consumers don't cook more with LPG when price decreases. In fact, households are convinced and have experienced that cylinders were less full when price was lower. So the decrease of the price is not a good reason for households to cook more with LPG. One missing factor on this slide, food taste. It is not here because it is not considered as a barrier by those consumers in comparison with the benefits of cooking with gas. Important to remind that our studies was done with LPG consumers. All those conclusions apply to LPG consumers, and the taste may remain and remains, in fact, a strong belief in non-LPG consumer. Oops. I'm not able to change the slide. Okay, now. Yes. So, what to do with all those findings? So Michelle will present after me the work we are doing with industry and with consumer education. I will now share just a few words on pilot activities we have tested with employers. So our motivation was to know if employer programs could be a promising avenue to scale up LPG adoption and use for LPG. Why employer programs? For different reasons. First, because employers have the potential to reach a large number of families through the workforce. Also, employers could contribute to overcome the upfront cost through special payment conditions with their employees. And finally, in Guatemala, programs for employees are very popular, especially to reduce the employee turnover. So based on these expectations, we have worked in Guatemala with 4 employers of different size and from different sectors. And this experience was extremely useful to learn about the reality of such employer programs. For example, to learn about bureaucracy, time constraints on both employer and employees' side, competition with the other products which are already offered to employees. As I said, those programs are quite popular in Guatemala. And at the end, a relatively low willingness of the employer to pay in advance for all those products. So what I'm saying right now seems to be quite negative, but we still consider that employer programs come with a very high potential, but under some conditions of flexibility, At the end, the employer is the one who decides. There is no one-size-fits-all programs. The programs have really to be defined with the collaboration of the employers, and a need of time, perseverance, many calls, many follow-up to be done with employers, and time also to establish trust with both employers and employees. And we would welcome any further discussion on those programs, and to better know the experience that you may have on those programs, and to see how to better use these opportunities. So now I give back the floor to Michelle to talk about what we are doing with industry now.
Okay. So we were very excited to call a meeting with industry to discuss the results of the market research and to challenge industry to develop strategies to grow their market. And we were very excited about providing information to industry about their market, the consumers, what we'd learned, and to see how they responded to this information, and to give them some hands-on work to strategize how to overcome some of the barriers and how to increase demand for LPG and promote its exclusive use. It was interesting just to have an opportunity to involve industry in addressing the problems that consumers expressed, and then see what they saw as solutions to these very widespread issues of distrust, poor perception of the industry, and so on. So, with some very good input from one of the industry folks, we had the meeting hosted by the Ministry of Energy and Mines, which is the ministry with oversight of the sector. And we facilitated the workshop, and our focus was what's in it for me, which I love this acronym, WIIFM. They say every participant in every workshop is tuned into this channel, what's in it for me. And so we presented the consumer study findings as in terms of their impact and interest and opportunity for industry. And we also motivated them by telling them basically their competitors were also invited to this meeting. And so don't be upstaged by your competition by not showing up. And to our surprise, and more the surprise of the ministry and industry, all the main suppliers attended. And the industry in Guatemala is a monopoly held largely by just 3 players, and with those players controlling roughly 90% of all LPG supplies, because all the LPG is imported, so these are the big importers. And not only were the big guys there, but the top level, the directors of those monopolies were also in the room. So when Maurice and Javier got up to the podium to talk about their findings, you could hear a pin drop. All the people in the room were taking notes, were listening, no one was talking. It was amazing. And so we felt really motivated, just having them so focused on the findings and so interested and really paying attention. After this meeting, we found out from the Ministry of Energy and Mines that this was the first time the ministry and the main suppliers had sat together in the same room for 15 years. So we wanted them to do more than just sit. and listening is not enough. No, we all know this. We don't retain things unless our brains have to process them. So we came up with a small group exercise that would mix up the industries, give them a task, and require them to think through what are solutions to the problems. So we, based on our research, we took the 3 problem areas of customer service, financial barriers, and infrastructure we threw in there, so it would be kind of a neutral topic. And we challenged them to come up with key strategies to overcome difficulties that we had mentioned in these areas. And we were very precise about what they needed to do and how they needed to do it. And Maurice, Javier, and I each sat at a different table, which later on people said, oh, well, everyone was civil because you guys were at each table, so no one really wanted to act up, which was, you know, funny to us because we couldn't see that. But I think we were successful in our objective to engage thinking by giving people a task to answer. So 7 priority topics came out of this initial discussion of 3 main areas. And under each topic, the groups developed a total of 18 strategies to overcome difficulties in these areas. For example, I want to talk about one of these that doesn't come next. Under efforts of industry and government, came up the issue of government oversight and regulation. And this all has to do with incompletely filled cylinders of LPG. The cylinders routinely were underweight. Some of them have shrink wrap seals, but those seals aren't tamper proof. As Maurice said, often when the price of gas went down, consumers cynically saw that as just underfilling the cylinders. And given the monopoly structure in Guatemala, the price of gas always was the same wherever you bought it and from whomever you bought it. So strategies that came up in the course of the workshop in this area were, number 1, identify where the LPG losses were taking place. Were they partially filled at the supplier, and then that the supplier sent partially filled cylinders to the retailer, or retailers using the gas that was full at the supplier for their own needs and then selling them to consumers? So finding where were these losses occurring. Strategy 2, conduct random inspections and issue fines when appropriate to strengthen enforcement and to make it clear that enforcement was being carried out. And strategy 3, encourage retailers to weigh the cylinders and use a cylinder weight as a marketing tool for themselves. Look, our cylinders are full. And these were among the strategies that were adopted. I'm going to talk more about the strategies where we intervened. And these were on two really big ones: consumer education and service delivery. Consumer education, you know, self-efficacy is a very strong determinant of whether people do something. And women don't know how to cook on LPG. They were taught how to cook on a fire since they were little. And so finding ways to increase women's confidence and knowledge of how to cook correctly on gas stoves would go a great deal towards strengthening demand. And then secondly, focus on proper installation and use. If consumers who are getting their home set up, getting gas in their home, don't know whether it's safe, they feel like they're kind of walking on eggshells and not trusting the equipment that they have. And so proper installation and use, both from the consumer's point of view and from industry point of view, is very important. Service delivery, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Let me move back. Wrong. Okay. In terms of LPG services, educate retailers about how to handle and how to install LPG setup safely, even develop certification programs, and to move training away from some suppliers to a broader training that perhaps had oversight by the ministry. Here you see a couple of cartoons. We developed several cartoon education pieces that deal with the topic of safe installation, and one about cooking with LPG. Okay, and what's next is work on a curriculum of safe installation, safe handling of LPG for LPG retailers. And we are in the very first stage of drafting the curriculum before holding follow-up joint meetings, and this is like on the cusp of where we are right now. Okay. And finally, I think the takeaways from both the process we used and the interventions was, you know, we all talk about listening to consumers, but do we really? Do we take what women are saying about how these stoves are difficult for them and actually making changes so they work better? Market research only has value if you apply it, and finding areas of mutual benefit with industry allows us to work together, and they are, in this case, they were quite surprised that we had a shared mutual benefit, and it really is about building relationships. There is trust that is built over time that allows us to intervene in this area. And then on the sector intervention, the universe of LPG users, the LPG pie, it can grow a lot. We're not reduced to just stealing pieces of pie from the person next to us. Of course, people would rather do that than explore growing the pie, but that's where the action is. And consumer education, a greater sense of respect for consumers and safe product, certification for safe handling and installation. These are all areas that have high potential impact and where we see the sector able to grow. Marise, do you have any last comments?
No, nothing else.
Thank you. Richard?
Good morning. And I cannot see the screen. The screen went away. I cannot see the presentation. If you could help me there, Kavana. Something happened here.
Sure, one moment please. Let me just try to get the screen back.
Thank you.
So, while we are waiting, maybe I take the opportunity to let you know that you can find, for the audience, you can find reports on our work with industry in the handout section of the application. And if you want to have more details on the employer program and on our initial market study, just be in touch with either Michelle or me, and we will send you the reports also.
Okay, thank you very much, and I have my screen back, can see. And I will present a little bit, very shortly, on my experiences within the LPG market in Guatemala, what we know. A lot of it has been already covered by Michelle and Marise, but also as an LPG user here in the country, I wanted to provide some insights as well. And I'm not managing to change screens. I don't have control. Here we go. Now I think I do. There we are. And so as it was mentioned, there is a monopoly. Actually, it's 3 Mexican brothers that are working the market, and they are basically the ones that are setting prices and all. Although they do not get along well, and they compete against each other, they do sit down and discuss how they want to handle the market. As it was mentioned, they handle more than 90% of the market here in country. The regulations on cylinders is a big issue here in the country, as there are some regulations, but they are only on new cylinders coming into the market. Having said that, there are neighboring countries that do have policies, like El Salvador and Nicaragua, where they have a limited lifespan for cylinders in the market, and a lot of those cylinders get recycled back to the country of Guatemala. And so what we get are a lot of second-hand LPG tanks coming into the country, and new ones that are manufactured in Guatemala are sent to Salvador and Nicaragua. And when we go into the field, like right now I am in the eastern area of the country, what you see in the stores are LPG cylinders that are very deteriorated, and when you're in the cities or in the urban areas, you see cylinders that are less deteriorated, and that is because they are carried in trucks in the back with roads with a lot of potholes or dirt roads, and so they get banged up quite a bit. So, as mentioned, LPG, there is a lot of stove stacking in Guatemala, and you can see in this household in the picture on your right, where there are 2 stove models, and also in the back, where the red arrow is, you can see an LPG stove. And the main issue with that is, although they do like using the LPG stove, they like cooking with LPG, they, again, since it is expensive, and they only use it for what, as they mention it, they say they use it for things that are quick to cook on. Again, with the preconceived idea that propane is more expensive to use than firewood. The issue is, again, when they're cooking, and even if they were cooking on LPG, if they run out of propane, as it was mentioned, there is no way to determine how much LPG is left unless they kind of pick it up and try to feel it, how much is left. They use long-term cooking issues like cooking black beans or corn for their tortillas. They will cook on with firewood because they know that they will have enough fuel to finish the cooking process. With LPG, they feel that they may run out. Price fluctuation is a big issue, and usually what happens is when prices of LPG increase, people will rapidly move towards firewood. But the reverse is not true. With LPG prices dropping, they will continue using the firewood for a prolonged period of time until they manage to fill the cylinder. Again, access to the cylinders is quite good in country now. There are a lot of points where they can buy at stores and different places, and now there is a more intricate supply chain of small trucks taking LPG cylinders to the household itself at no additional cost. But still, there's the time issue. How long does it take from the call to actually receiving the LPG there? A lot of urban areas are now also selling firewood by the stick at the stores, which is also an issue because they can dose firewood, but they cannot dose the amount of LPG they are buying. Overall, and I think this was also mentioned by Michelle, LPG use has been reduced and firewood usage has increased in the past years, according to the ENCOVI studies. And I will show you, I think it's the next slide. If not, it will be, no, it's the following one. But I will show you a table where you can see that. So the cook stove availability, and this is the comparison, the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves is seeking for cleaner cooking. Yes, the cleaner fuels, but also cleaner technologies to remove the smoke from the households and be more fuel efficient. Guatemala is a country that has is a lot of land that should be used for forest coverage and the generation of firewood. Right now we have a lack, or we are deforesting at a rate of about 5 million tons of 5 million cubic meters of firewood per year in Guatemala. That's the deficient side of it. But it should be able to be done renewably. Now, in the cook stove industry, the issue with the firewood is that they are not generally available. We are now starting to promote the installation of stores in different points of the country. So there are availability of the options, of clean cooking options, using firewood and chimneys to remove the smoke from the households. Most stoves in Guatemala, due to the heavy rainfalls during 6 to 8 months of the year, are cooking inside, and so in the Latin American countries, we do stress the use of chimneys on cook stoves, not one-pot stoves, but usually multi-pot stoves. The distribution of these are usually done through, traditionally have been done through NGOs and government, and now we are trying to promote, on the side of the Alliance, the generation of a market to distribute. On the other side, the LPG stoves are commercially available through many distributors physically. Again, there is an issue there of the ability to buy. In cook stoves, firewood cook stoves, there is limited or no post-sale services, and in LPG you can readily service your LPG stove. So that's that. And also LPG stoves, there are a wide range of stove models available from one pot LPG stoves to 4-pot or 6-pot stove burners and ovens, etc. Within the cook stove, firewood cook stove, we have less availabilities or less variability there. The price range, it's cheaper to buy an LPG stove, just the stove itself, the unit, and actually a lot of it is, when you include the cylinder and the regulator and all, it's still a very similar pricing. So, but credit availability is limited or inaccessible to the bottom of the pyramid. So that's a big issue, but now there are a lot of stores that are coming up with different schemes and mechanisms to make credit more available, although the interest rates grow a lot more with the reduced requirements. So that's an issue when people look at that price tag and sometimes are dissuaded from buying due to that. And firewood is readily available, although prices are going up, but they still feel that fuel is cheaper the firewood is cheaper to use than LPG. The issue with LPG is that the traditional size of the cylinder is the 25-pound cylinder, and so they have to buy large volumes of fuel at a time, where the other one they can buy it at stick at a time, as I had mentioned. And so here is the table I was mentioning, where you can see how the use of Firewood has increased over the years in the urban areas from 65 to 79%, and the use of LPG has been reduced from 74 to 70%. And sorry, that was the rural areas. Let me see, I'm getting it wrong here. No, that was the urban. And in the rural areas, firewood has basically remained the same, 93 to 94%, but the use of LPG has been reduced. Again, that has a lot to do with pricing, and along with all the other issues that were mentioned in the previous presentations of lack of trust, etc. A lot of times what is happening, and when Marisa and Michelle were talking about where the LPG is being lost, and a lot of times it is not the cylinder itself that is less filled, even at the point of filling or at the store where they are purchasing it. A lot of times what is happening is that the regulators that the end users have at home have been deteriorated, or the gasket in the cylinder is not changed as frequently as it should, so they have leakage and when they install these LPG cylinders at home. So that is a big issue there, and that's another place where that needs to be educated on, or the manufacturers or the fillers, the distributors of LPG need to be changing the gasket on every filling of the cylinders. So in conclusions, oops, went too far, and here I am. There's common knowledge of the comfort. People like it. They know it is clean and it is fast. But they're always associating the LPG with and using the firewood along for the longer term cooking processes they have at home. There's still the incorrect perception that LPG is more expensive to use, but I think that is again also due to the cost of buying a full cylinder. Right now it's 110. It came down from 140 quetzales to 110 quetzales, so it's been reduced. But they still they have to have that amount of money available instead of being able to buy the firewood at one stick at a time for 1 quetzal each time. There are several barriers that, of course, need to be overcome. Again, the package size or payment mechanisms. Right now, I've heard a lot about these pay-as-you-go mechanisms. Envirofit just came out with their own version of that, which is exciting. But all of these are being tested in Africa and Asia and not in Latin America. And so we need to bring some of those in this direction to see if that could help. Safety, the cylinder regulations, policies, ownership, etc., need to be worked on. And also teaching people how to safely use. I do agree with that. Also, the manufacturers of the stoves themselves could start implementing what we get in the higher end stoves, the safety mechanisms where the valve is on, but there is no flame. The supply of LPG is automatically shut off. That would also help there. So it's both on the supply of the fuel, but also on the technology that is using that fuel. The guarantee of the exact volume, again, I'm mentioning that is not as big an issue, although there is that perception, but when there are now a lot of spot checks by the Ministry of Energy and Mines, and there haven't been too many issues regarding that in the past year and a half right now. So the issue of how much I have left is a big issue. They cannot see that. There are ways the industry could include technology that already exists. There are valves that have the fuel tank gauge that tells you how much you have. They could be implementing that at very little cost. And the availability, which is a big issue, the 5-minute rule, it was what I have learned in the different forums I've attended of selling to the bottom of the pyramid, is that if a solution is not within 5 minutes of the household, they will be seeking or using other solutions in combination or solely. So that is a big issue of having if they run out of propane, they should be able to, or LPG, they need to have the ability to have the replacement within 5 minutes. And that would also help on the supply side. But what we've also seen is that the younger populations, they have more access to internet now. They have access to Facebook, which is widely used to communicate with the migrant workers up in the U.S., and they see how they are living. They see there's no smoke in the home, and so they are more willing to adapt to that. So what we believe is that more awareness in the classroom could highly impact that. Unfortunately, the children are becoming parents at a very early age, especially in the rural areas where it could be anywhere between 14 and 18 years old when women become mothers. But they are more, they're seeking comfort more than the older population. Stovetacking will most probably continue in the rural areas due to less access to LPG and the stronger following of tradition. That is cooking their tortillas, preparing their own corn for making tortillas and cooking the black beans. In the urban areas, we hear more and see more people now purchasing their tortillas from a vendor and using canned to prepare their food. So that's what I have for you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you, Marise, and thank you, Michelle, for that terrific presentation. We're going to try to answer as many questions that have come in through the chat question panel as much as possible. And I'm going to ask our presenters to try to keep their answers as succinct as possible in the interest of time, as we are over the 11 o'clock hour already. I'm going to put together some of the more Guatemala-specific questions first, and then I will open that up to another question from one of our participants who've asked about LPG suitability for other markets. So one of the questions that have come in asks, have any LPG-caused fires or explosions been reported in Guatemala?
So
The answer go ahead, Marise.
So the answer is yes. Yes and yes. And so in fact there is both the medias like a lot these types of news. So when there is an accident, everybody knows about that. And in fact we are waiting for precise statistics from a local institution on those types of events to have a better idea of the number of accidents. But yeah, there are, and this is why we really want to focus on security, safe use of LPG to reduce these types of the number of accidents.
Having said that, the reports on explosions or issues regarding LPG have been largely reduced. You used to see those a lot more frequently 5 years, 10 years ago, and recently it has been very little in the news or non-existent.
Apologies, I was on mute. Thank you, Richard. There was a mention during the presentation that LPG is more expensive than wood. How do fuel costs actually compare?
Well, that's actually not correct. LPG is not more expensive than wood, and that's the interesting issue. When we compare the cost of wood, we ran a couple of tests ourselves with our colleagues, having them cook exclusively with LPG until the cylinder ran out, and having them cook with wood for the same period and comparing the costs. And it's an interesting dilemma because the cost of LPG is actually less, but the unit, the purchase unit, since it's so much larger, and wood can be bought in very small quantities or collected. For those who are purchasing their fuel, the cost of LPG is perceived as being more, but actually it's the size of the purchase rather than the total cost. And this is an area of perception that we have a lot of work to do in.
Thank you, Michelle. Oh,
I may
Richard,
want
please.
to add just one word, in fact, because we have also made some experiments with families to ask them cooking only with firewood and then only with, first only with LPG and then only with firewood to make this comparison. And this was done when LPG was, in Guatemala, when LPG was quite more expensive than what it is now. And the numbers were very clear. Even with higher price of LPG, it was more expensive cooking with firewood than with LPG. But again, depends then on location. There are some places in Guatemala where firewood is very expensive. Depends on seasons. Some seasons, same thing, firewood is much more expensive, but still, yeah. I wanted to share this experiment.
And I would just add that currently, and this is what I have seen and sort of talking to the families, they could be spending 2/3 of what they're spending on fuel wood currently at current prices. When the price is around 100 quetzales a 25-pound cylinder, they could actually be saving up to 50% in cost of fuel to cook. Again, it's also the association or the idea that black beans don't taste as good in an aluminum or stainless steel pressure cooker. They'd rather have the clay pot to cook their black beans, for instance. But again, that the need to associate LPG with more efficient technologies and all. But I think the highest constraint, again, is the price of, as Michelle said it, the price of having to buy a full cylinder versus small amounts of wood at a time.
Great, thank you. We have lots of great questions, so we're going to try to move quickly on this. And to the point on prices, is LPG subsidized in Guatemala?
Oh, good question.
No,
it is not subsidized. It's entirely imported and it's not subsidized.
Great. I'm going to move up the ladder here. We have a question regarding, to any of your knowledge, has there been a study on local production of bio-LPG?
No.
Great.
Yeah.
Loud and
So
clear.
if some participants have some information to share on that, I mean, you're welcome. Just be in touch with us.
And is that bio-LPG or biogas that they're asking?
The question stated bio-LPG.
Yeah, and even in biogas, there are very few interventions that have been tested. They have been mostly unsuccessful. They are more successful in the industry level, like in farm settings and stuff like that, but not at the household level. Right now, there will be an effort starting towards the end of this year, over the next 5 years, to implement about 10,000 biogas systems in the western part of the country.
Great. We have a question here on the cylinders. Have they been stress tested to see just how they are able to pass safety levels?
The issue with the cylinder care and maintenance is really fraught, because in the law it shows that the consumer is the owner of the cylinders, not industry. And while consumers technically own the cylinders, when they buy a new cylinder, they're turning in the cylinder they have for another one of uncertain quality. And so while when industry refills cylinders, they're supposed to test them and repair them. We know that this is happening in such a fraction of the cases that the estimated cylinder stock in the whole country is considerably out of date, and it represents an enormous problem. to refurbish these cylinders for a whole country that have not been refurbished in decades.
And the Ministry of Energy and Mines has the laboratory where they do test brand new cylinders that are going to enter the market for stress, etc. But that is the only time they do the testing in a generalized way.
Terrific. Okay, we're going to move on to the next set of questions, which are similarly related. Can ethanol or methanol compete with LPG on a cost basis or any other criteria? And on top of that, are there any other liquid fuels besides ethanol or methanol that could allow non-pressurized containment in this market?
So on ethanol, so maybe Richard, you can tell about what is being done now in Guatemala on those aspects. And I would say probably all the documentation and studies which are done by the Global Alliance probably have the answer to this question, the comparison of bioethanol with LPG.
Thank you, Maurice. Yes, Guatemala is a heavy ethanol producer. We have 5 distillers, but 90% of that ethanol produced is being exported because of regulations to distribute ethanol within the country. The 10% that remains behind is to make rum, basically. But having said that, I have a meeting actually on Friday where we will be discussing there are laws already written to distribute denatured alcohols in country, and they need to be adapted to alcohol for cooking, because there is a regulation against selling ethanol for carburant needs. We do produce the 99.99% pure alcohol for carburant industry, and as I mentioned, it was exported. So yes, there is the ability to liberate that through policy, and that's what we'll be working on. Ethanol is a lot easier to distribute than LPG in small amounts. They could be sold in 1-liter bottles to do the refills of the different models that are available. One of the distillers has brought in 50 ethanol stoves from these 2-burner stoves that Project Gaia is using, but they have not been able to distribute them due to that issue of ethanol distribution at the time. But yes, it could be heavy competition and locally produced fuel for LPG in the close future.
Great. Okay, making our way down. The next question asks, could char-making stoves, which allows zero cost through sale of charcoal/biochar, viably compete with LPG?
Sorry, I did not understand the question. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the participant is asking if, given the LPG market, are there other alternatives that could compete with it, including charcoal and biochar cook stoves, and how does that compete with LPG?
So Guatemala does not traditionally cook with charcoal in the households. That is, Nicaragua would be a heavy contender for that. Managua, Nicaragua uses charcoal heavily. But in Guatemala, it's only used for recreational or for the food industry, where they sell grilled, charred meat, charcoal meat. There are large bamboo producers that are looking into that right now, of producing the char and biochar for cooking and for agricultural use. So it's something that should be looked more into, but at the time, due to culture and ways of cooking, it might be difficult to start a new fuel like that one.
Great. I think for the last 2 questions, we will broaden the scope of the LPG market. One participant asked, is LPG ideal for all countries? does it actually meet the needs of rural populations of households in Africa and Asia, for example?
Maybe we can each take a brief crack at this. I'd say that LPG has great flexibility. It has a lot of advantages. Foremost among them is that minuscule production of the particulates, or maybe no particulates, and minuscule production of harmful gases, which is a huge plus. Whether it's ideal for everyone, I think that varies based on distribution, availability, and cost. I think our biggest challenge is for populations that are picking up fuel and gathering fuel for free. Nothing beats free. This is not free. And so there is a huge challenge. It's an excellent fuel, and that's why it's used all over the world.
I would say it can be adapted, especially in these countries in Guatemala. It could be adapted to a lot of the cooking needs and all. I think there are a lot of myths that need to be broken, like the black beans tasting better on firewood than on propane. I think there are ways to modify that. But also, it is an imported product, and countries like Guatemala that have a big deficit in the exchange, where we're exporting less than we are importing, could benefit by using local fuels a lot more than utilizing imported fuels. It affects the economy, and the price fluctuation also makes people sway back and forth with the types of fuel they'll be using. Ethanol would be a lot more stable. What Ecuador is doing, for instance, where they're moving from LPG, which is imported, 90% of it is imported, to the use of induction stoves, because almost 100% of their electric grid is provided through renewable resources. There a lot of hydro is being used. So they're moving towards locally produced electricity, which is a lot cleaner yet than imported LPG. So those are things that need to be considered.
Great. I think the last question maybe is an interesting segue to the supply issue. And the question is, with the greater promotion of LPG, will the clean cooking sector potentially see a return to biofuels at a later stage as LPG supplies run out as a result of its increased global use?
Well, we've heard for decades about, gasoline will run out. Somehow we manage to continue to produce cars and drive for hours to our jobs. I think what's interesting about this question is familiarizing Guatemalans with a clean, odorless cooking fuel would certainly make it easy to switch to, say, a biofuel if that becomes available. Certainly, what we've seen is that as more women are entering the workforce, they don't have time to start a fire to cook the foods, and this is one of the key responses among women is, I turn it on and I have instant heat, as opposed to building a fire and having that fire having to burn for a while before it's really producing heat. And so I think having more options is great, and this is an option that could facilitate transition to even better fuels if and when they're available.
I do believe that LPG, what will limit it, I think there's a supply that will outlast most of us that are on this webinar right now. But the return to renewable energies, I think, will be a trend that coming forward in the world. Also dealing with the deal of drilling and mining and all that. There's a lot of resistance in Latin America against that. So yes, I think that eventually there will be a tendency to try to go back to renewable or electricity being generated by renewable sources, and then moving into electrical appliances, or the use of ethanols, which are also odorless and very clean, or other types of sources like that. But I think it will be long-term, not short-term, any movement in any direction.
Great. Any parting thoughts before we conclude from the presenters? All right, I think that is a wrap. Thank you all so much for participating in our webinar, and wanted to thank again Michelle, Marise, and Richard for a really terrific, insightful discussion on this ever-evolving market and sector. And to those of you who joined us, if you have any further questions for the Alliance or any of our presenters, our contact information is here on the screen. As mentioned and indicated earlier in the webinar, we have recorded this webinar, so please look out for it on our YouTube page to refer to later and share with any of your other colleagues. Thank you again. We look forward to hosting the next webinar in a couple of months, and we hope you'll join us for that as well. Take care.